Great to see everybody today. We're continuing this morning a study we've been doing through the book of James. As I get started, I actually have a specific prayer request for you this week. So something I've been doing for the last several years, 8 to 10 years, every year I'll take 1 week that I'll set aside specifically to pray and to study scripture and really just to spend a lot of time asking God to try and help me know what it is that I'm supposed to teach and what it is that I'm supposed to do, and just to have wisdom about the ways that I try to help contribute to the life of our congregation. And so I'm going to be spending a lot of time this week in prayer myself. And I would ask that you be praying for me, that God would give me those things and that God would help me. And when I do this, it's kind of a mini sabbatical week. And so I don't have any other teaching or preaching responsibilities on the weeks that I do this. And so the next week, we're happy to have a couple of people who are helping to cover for me so that I can dedicate some extra time to this. So I'm not going to be out of town. I'm not going anywhere. But this is a very important week for me in my routines and my rituals for the year. So would ask you to be praying about that. Have you ever considered what it would have been like to be one of the children of Israel out in the wilderness and to wake up every morning and have manna provided for you to eat? Have you ever thought about what that would be like? Where all you really had to do was just wake up in the morning and go out and gather what it was that you needed to eat for the day, but every day to know that God was the one who was going to provide it. Now, if you're the long-term planning type, I can imagine sometimes it might be a little anxiety-inducing, right? Well, how do I know? He gave it to us this morning. How do I know it's going to be there the next morning? But yet, every day, predictably, God continued to bless and continued to show up and continued to provide. So the truth is, just because God provides our blessings and our sustenance in different ways than manna, we are no less dependent on God and His mercies for our lives than they were. Every morning, we need God's providence, we need God's help, and when God withholds something, we really have no ability to produce on our own what God doesn't bless us with. In the course of life, we often learn this the hard way, don't we? There's all kinds of things that we just assume are going to be in place. I assume I'm going to wake up healthy tomorrow with all my senses functioning. I assume I'm going to be able to show up at work and do the things I intend to do. I assume my cars are probably going to be running. I assume my house is still going to be over my head and functioning. There's all these things we just assume because we're so accustomed to blessing after blessing after blessing. But again, if God were to withhold any of these things from us, even momentarily, suddenly we realize just how dependent we are on God for everything that we have. So in our text for today, kind of referencing Wilbur's comments earlier, what James does here is he provides a series of warnings to people who are very comfortable in life. When life has gotten to be really routine and we just assume things are always going to continue the way that they have and we're kind of invincible and nothing bad's going to happen to us, our text for today has a number of warnings about this. And so thinking about the people that James is going to talk about as the rich, I thought it would be interesting to look into some global statistics about wealth. I'm going to share just 2 with you. But if you're wondering who James could be talking to in this passage, consider that if you have $4,210 to your name in any format, your vehicles, your bank accounts, everything combined, if you've got that much money, you're in the top 50% of the world in terms of wealth. Now, I don't assume everybody fits this next category, but if your total net worth, including your housing, your retirement accounts, all these things, if your total net worth is a little more than $93,000, you're wealthier than 90% of the world. So again, I don't just assume everybody fits those criteria, but I think knowing where we are, and in fact, if you've even been a homeowner for the last 3 or 4 years, you almost certainly qualify for the second one, the way that home values have gone. But when James wants to warn the wealthy and the comfortable, he's almost certainly talking to us. And so I decided to title my message this morning, Warnings to the Comfortable. And I'm going to tell you on the front end, I really hope you don't like my sermon this morning. So many of you are kind and will offer me compliments. If you come up to me today after church and you say, Mark, I really liked your sermon, I'm going to think you weren't listening and I didn't do something right. If you feel good about anything that you've heard today, I hope you might say something like, wow, that was a really challenging word that I needed to hear. I appreciate the healthy stretch. This is a difficult passage. Thank you for talking about it. But yeah, I don't hope today will be your favorite sermon, because it certainly isn't going to be mine. But we don't only get to look at the passages in Scripture that make us feel good, we also have to look at the passages that challenge us. So let me share with you some warnings that I hear James sharing with us. The first warning he gives is that all of us really need to draw near to God while we still can. The truth is, your opportunities to get closer to God are limited. There will come a point in time where that door is closed forever, your life is over, and you don't have more opportunities. And we know this is true because as you get older, you can start thinking back over different phases of your life, and you can remember phases of your life that are over. If you're well past high school, you're never going to make another memory of something you did back in high school. Once that door is closed, it's closed. The same thing goes for our college years. The same thing goes for our years as young professionals or whatever we are, middle age, all these things, these phases pass. And once they're past, we don't get to go back and insert new actions. Coming to know God is an urgent matter because once you've missed the opportunities, you don't get more of them. You can always return. God gives us unlimited grace. He's always willing to accept us at any phase of our life. But if you know you should be clinging to God, James says don't neglect that while you can do it. James chapter 4 and verse 6, he says, but he gives us more grace. This is why Scripture says God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve and mourn and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. James is talking about some of the spiritual snares that wait for us when we're capable in life of being too comfortable. When we're in a position where we can only think about our own comforts, our own desires and wishes, and we can try to create the life for ourselves that we think is mostly just about us. He says the devil is at work in that, and he warns us to resist the devil's work. Thinking back to the time that Jesus was first baptized and then went out into the wilderness to be tempted, I'm reminded of some of the ways that Satan tried to tempt Jesus. There were several forms of seduction that he was trying to use. For us, there is the seduction of self-sufficiency. Just take these rocks and turn them into bread, Satan says to Jesus. You can provide for yourself. You can make everything that you need. We want to believe this lie that really, with a little more time and a little more career path, I can take care of all my own needs. I can provide everything for myself. It was the fundamental temptation in the garden. If you eat this fruit and you know what God knows, then you don't need God anymore. We're tempted to try and live into self-sufficiency. It's a seduction technique, but it's ultimately a lie. I'm not capable of sustaining everything in my life. I'm not the one who makes the world spin. If my health disappears tomorrow, I'm not the one who's able to restore it. There's so many things we could lose so quickly. None of us is self-sufficient, but we want to believe that lie. There's the seduction of self-importance. You know, you're such a big deal that if you would just throw yourself from the temple, God would send angels to catch you. We want to start believing that we're so significant that somehow God ought to just be really flattered that we make any time for him at all. I'm so successful, everybody knows that I'm great, I've achieved all the things that I set out to do. Isn't God lucky to have someone like me, the little time that I can spare for him? The seduction of self-importance. It won't be too long after any of us pass that life moves on, people move on, and it's ultimately God's memory of us that's the only thing that will last. I don't think many of us have any active memories or active thoughts about our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. They're just not part of our lives as we move forward. All that really matters is what God knows and remembers about them. Self-importance is another seduction technique. And of course, there's also the seduction of power. We like control. Control is a total illusion, but we go for it so many times. with another promotion and another opportunity and another thing that I've learned, another skill set that I possess, another title after my name, suddenly, maybe I can control things and make them the way that I want them to be. And of course, it doesn't take long before additional power leads us to dishonesty, manipulation, coercion, the cutthroat environments that so many of us work in. All these exercises of power, seduction techniques of the devil. James says instead, we have to draw near to God and he'll draw near to us. If you were to just take a moment and kind of survey your life with your mind, there's a lot of different ways you can think about drawing nearer to God. In some case, maybe the ways in which you need to draw near to God are kind of physical things, where you've been outside of church for a really long time, you've been withholding yourself from participating in godly things, and you just physically need to start showing up again. You need to physically connect yourself more to what God is doing in the world. Maybe it's a social or a relational thing where there are people you could be investing in, people that you could be helping, and yet you've been refraining from doing that, and you're not sending the text messages or the emails, and you're not making the visits or the phone calls, and there's something socially you could do to draw closer to God. Maybe it's a matter of your intellect. You're chasing after lots of things that interest you, but not going deeper in the Word. There's a lot of forms that this can take, but the fundamental invitation is draw near to God, and God draws near to you. Make yourself available to God, and God can shape you even more. But let's remember, our opportunities to do this are limited. Our life is moving so quickly. It's passing so quickly. We've got to resist the devil's temptations, his seduction techniques to try and get us off the course, and we've got to continue focusing on God because it's an urgent matter to know God in this life. It is an urgent matter to prepare to meet God in the next life. That's one warning that we find here. Another warning in James's book is that we don't need to let our future aspirations crowd out our present opportunities. We don't need to let our future aspirations crowd out our present opportunities. In the plans that you're making for yourself, how much is God a part of the things that you're planning on? How much is God taken into consideration for the things you're trying to do? James says that one of the risks of being too comfortable in life, one of the risks of having too many good things at your disposal, is that you start to just only fixate on the next good thing that you want, and the next place you hope to go, and the next thing that you hope to buy, and you start gazing further and further into the future, just assuming that it's all going to pass the way that you're hoping that it is. James chapter 4 and verse 13. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Verse 17 takes an unexpected twist. Because most people, especially in this setting, when they want to define what it means to be an upright person, you would kind of define yourself based on what you don't do, right? I can look at the Ten Commandments and I don't break any of those things, and I'm not an axe murderer, and I'm not a bank robber, and I'm not out there doing anything really terrible. And you say, well, as long as I'm not doing terrible stuff, I'm probably good enough. But James points that in the opposite direction and says, yeah, what about the opportunities in front of you that you should be participating in that you're choosing not to? It's not just a matter of refraining from malicious evil. It's also a matter of refraining from the good God is putting right in front of you that he's calling on you to participate in. I've heard some people describe this as a sort of practical atheism, where we kind of claim victory in our faith. Well, I believe the right things and I'm not doing too many bad things, and so I'm probably good enough. But then you start looking at the details of a person's life and you can't really find where God fits in the picture anywhere other than perhaps just church attendance or a basic, I claim Christianity and these are the things I kind of believe to be true. But functionally speaking, God isn't part of any of my planning. God isn't part of any of my reasoning. God isn't really influencing me in any meaningful ways. It's all really just about me and my agenda and some of the things that I hope to do. And so I would think of it like this. If someone did not know you were a Christian and was not going to do a Bible study with you, but they did have access to your personal planner, scheduler, to your personal calendar, to your bank records, to your phone records, if they could see all of that stuff about you, would it be immediately obvious to them that you're a Christian? There should be more ways to tell you're a Christian than whether specifically just you're here at this hour or not. What about the other parts of your life? All the other ways that we keep records of who we are and what we do. Is it conspicuous from those things that your dedication is primarily to God, or do you just look like everybody else in the world? Too much focus on our future plans, our future goals, it could cause us to do a couple of things. Number one, it can cause us to fail to appreciate our present blessings. Isn't it the case that we've all had that thing that we just said, if I could just save up and get one of those, if I could get a good enough job that I could afford one of those and I could have that, then I really ought to be happy, right? I ought to be happy and content in life. And then what happens? You get that thing, and almost immediately, there's a better one that comes out, at least by next year, or there's a newer one or a nicer one, or there's more features, or you discover that maybe this amount of room isn't as much room as I thought it was, and I need something a little bigger. But no matter what we get, there's always the possibility of looking for something else. And if all we do is focus on our future goals, we may fail to appreciate in the present how much we've already been given, how much we've already been blessed. It's certainly the case for me that more than once in my life as a younger person, I thought if only I could have that thing or achieve this or be recognized for this, then I'd feel like I was a whole and, successful person. And then that thing happens and it didn't fix that hole in myself. And I'm looking for the next thing. I think we've all done that. Too much focus on the future can cause us to fail to appreciate our present blessings, but it can also cause us to avoid our present duties because of our good intentions for what we're going to do later. That line of reasoning is so easy to access. Well, I'm in a busy season right now. I'm in a building season right now. And once life gets easy, folks, when does that ever happen? When life gets easy, that's when I'm going to start doing all the stuff that's really important. God, I know you're important and I know I need more time for you, but when everything clears up and I'm not so worried about having more and making more and being more, then I'm going to make some time for you and it's going to be great and I'm going to start working on my faith. This just isn't how life works. We don't have any guarantees we'll be able to do any of that. Something I've wrestled with for several years. I'm a pretty goal-oriented person. And I usually, not often, sometime around December, I usually do sit down and try to make some goals for myself of what I want to work on and what I want to prioritize and all that kind of thing. But one time I was doing this, and I was making a list specifically of a few things I thought we needed for the house or a couple of things I just kind of like to have or buy. And I prioritize them based on cost and urgency and all that kind of stuff. And so I made my list, and I kind of strategized a little bit about how long it was going to take for me to achieve all that. And then what occurred to me was I was willing to make a plan for something taking longer. I was willing to accept delayed gratification, but it had never occurred to me that I might need to sometimes consider denied gratification. I don't actually need to have all that stuff I think I might like to have. There's a lot of things that I could chase after, experiences that I could want, and it'd be fine. It'd be okay, but maybe I don't actually need all that stuff. I had considered delayed gratification, but maybe the Christian thing to do is to sometimes consider denied gratification, that pleasing myself isn't the ultimate end that I should be working for. And if this thing's going to get in the way of my walk with God, it might even be better not to have it, not to indulge in it, even if it's not a bad thing. Denied gratification. James warns us, don't let your future plans and aspirations cause you to neglect your present opportunities, the blessings you have and the things you could already do right now. A third warning in this passage, I especially don't like this one. You have what you have for the sake of others. You have what you have for the sake of others. This is especially hard to accept because absolutely no one around us in the world lives by that philosophy. Do they? Very few. It's all about self-promotion, self-aggrandizement, having more, getting more, being more, recognition, power, all those things. James reminds us that the blessings we have are fundamentally about others. So there's a fictional story about this person who got an opportunity to talk to God face to face, just the way that Job did at the end of Job. This guy finds out he's going to have an opportunity to talk to God face to face and ask him a question. And he says, this is amazing. And he prepares for it, and the day comes, and he's welcomed into the presence of God so that he can have this conversation with God face to face. And God says, well, what would you like to talk about? And the man says, well, God, I never really wanted to believe in you because I look around me and I see people suffering. I see hungry people. I see people who can't make ends meet. I see kids in the neighborhood without any good role models in their life. And so, God, I've got this one question for you. I know that you have the power to make things better, so why don't you do something about it? And God's response was, it's funny you should ask that because I was going to ask you exactly the same question. What opportunities are there right in front of us? The things that we have, is it really just about us, or do we have what we have for the sake of others? James gets especially heated in chapter 5. He says, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. So in the ancient world, there were basically two paths to wealth. One was to be kind of a blue blood who inherited it, and these were the landowners. And so your family, your household might own large portions of land, and then tenant farmers and slaves would farm your property, and then they would pay you to be able to use the property. But of course, you'd never sell any of it. You would always, in perpetuity, continue making profits off of the land that you owned. And those people certainly thought of themselves as kind of a higher class. It was also possible to work as a merchant and sort of claw your way to the top. And so through good business practices and aggressive sales techniques and working hard and all the things that you would do to build a business, as a merchant, you could also become quite affluent. But it was the case that the landowners would never really grant the same kind of status to the people who had to work their way up. There was definitely that kind of dynamic involved. But there's a very important category that emerges here, and it's all the people who weren't those first two categories. All the people in the world who are stuck with whatever minimum wage job they could get, who are stuck somewhere near the bottom of the ladder because they didn't have the means or the education or the tools by which to really advance anywhere. It's the people who are at the mercy of the powerful people, the employees, the ones that God pays special attention to. And so what I hear James saying is, the vulnerable people in your life, the people whose wages you determine, the people whose quality of life you control by what you pay them, the people who are at your mercy for their well-being. He says, consider this. When they pray to God, it's as if they're shouting at God through a megaphone. When vulnerable people pray to God, God is absolutely paying attention. God is absolutely listening. And so if we're going to try and apply James's passage to our own context, I would ask you, if you're in a position where you're managing other human beings, if you're in a position where you set wages and control the quality of life and schedule and all these things for people who work underneath you, when they pray about you, what kinds of things do you think they say to God? When they pray about you, what are the kinds of things you'd hope they would be praying? Wouldn't it be great to know that God is hearing like a megaphone someone saying, I am so thankful for him because of the good way he treats my family and how good this job has been when every other job had been so rough. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that she's provided and how sensitive she's been to my needs. Those are the ways you want those people talking to God about you. But you sure don't want them going to God saying, God, would you please just soften their heart? God, would you please just get them to see my situation and have some mercy? God, could you please just help me find another way to get a week off somewhere to take care of my kid? If you're in a position to control something like that, be very careful how people bring you up before God, because God is paying attention, and God, who created all of us, will hold each of us accountable for the things that we've done. It's easy to say, well, in my life, I'm just like everybody else. I want to be fat and happy. But he says, you need to be thinking about the slaughter, because which is the calf that gets eaten first? It's the real fat, happy one. They're delicious. He says, watch out for the day of slaughter. So I wanted to share something with you. These are, in my opinion, I find these to be some very heavy passages. I wanted to share something with you that's been helpful to me over the years. I think if we're trying to pull back from living a life of extravagance, we ought to be striving to live a life of simplicity. To me, simplicity is a good Christian thing to strive for. And so I wanted to share these guidelines with you that I get from Richard Foster. Again, I found these several years ago, and when I'm trying to sort out my own heart and my own priorities, I think these have been helpful to me. So he suggests, if you're trying to live a life of simpleness, simplicity, not extravagance, here's some things you could consider. Number one, buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. Am I buying this because I need to be seen owning it, or am I buying this because it actually serves some real purpose in my life and could be a blessing to others? He says, reject anything that's producing an addiction in you. When I persist in this, do I just crave more and more and more and more of it, and does it never stop? Reject things that create addictions in you. Develop a habit of giving things away. God already gave you everything that you have. He can give you more stuff. If you've got something that you know someone else needs, share it. Make a habit of giving things away. Number 4 is important. Refuse to be propagandized by the custodians of modern technology. There's always this urgency to buy the latest, greatest, newest thing, but it's always the case that there's another one next year that's even better. Don't let them propagandize you. He says, learn to enjoy things without owning them. There are a lot of things that you can enjoy without having to purchase. And beyond this, good to develop an appreciation for creation. All the material possessions we could ever have really don't compete with the beauty to be found in nature, which is free and open to all of us that God has given us. Number 7, look with a healthy skepticism at all buy now, pay later schemes. You could find yourself being a servant to someone else that you're indebted to. He says, obey Jesus' instructions about plain, honest speech. When we start feeling the need to embellish or to puff up ourselves, this is of the devil. Follow Jesus' teachings about plain, honest speech. Reject anything that breeds the oppression of others. Sometimes this can be a real dilemma in finding out about something you like to buy. If it was sourced in such a way that you know for a fact it was really oppressive to someone else. Those weak, vulnerable people, we've got to be careful how we treat them. Reject anything that breeds the oppression of others. And number 10 summarizes it all so well. Shun anything that distracts you from seeking first the kingdom of God. Jesus says, if it's your right eye, gouge it out, right? If it's your right hand, you chop it off. But if there's something that you know in your life is a roadblock and a stumbling block that is keeping you from the kingdom, get it out of there. You don't need it. You need God. You don't need the stuff. You don't need the accolades. You don't need the other things. I wanted to share a quote with you from C.S. Lewis that I think summarizes a lot of these ideas very well. He's talking about life in the world, because deep down, all of us do have this yearning to feel happiness, to feel joy, to feel complete somehow. But the truth is, this world is never going to fully offer that to us. And anything we chase after is eventually going to leave us feeling dry and bankrupt. Listen to this quote. He says, the settled happiness and security which we all desire, God withholds from us by the very nature of the world. But joy, pleasure, and merriment he has scattered broadcast. We are never safe, but we have plenty of fun and some ecstasy. It is not hard to see why. The security we crave would teach us to rest our hearts in this world and pose an obstacle to our return to God. A few moments of happy love, a landscape, a symphony, a merry meeting with our friends, a bath, or a football match have no such tendency. Our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant ends, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. I like that line. Our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant ends. We find some nice places along the way, but God doesn't ever want us to mistake these things here for our true home. None of the things that people are chasing after around here are really going to fulfill us. They're all going to come up empty. And we don't want to waste our present opportunities to know the one who can fill us and complete us in every way, to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, to have the peace that passes understanding. This is the home that we're ultimately striving for. So this morning, maybe there is something that's been weighing on you, and maybe the thing you need to do is to spend some time this afternoon and reflect on your life and think about your priorities and the things that I've been persisting in doing. Are they really producing in me what I hoped they would? Are they really getting me where I wanted to go? Maybe it's time for some refocusing and retooling. Maybe there's something you'd like to present to the congregation this morning, something that we could all be praying about, or a commitment that you need to make. We've also got a QR code here on the screen and in your bulletin where if you'd like to just interact with us digitally, you can do that as well. But however we could help you this morning, this is a time you're welcome to respond if you'd like, while together we stand and sing.